Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest aliens and UFOs video. I thought I would mix this one in here while I'm continuing to do your cryptids and monster suggestions. This one has to do with another sighting, an actual case that occurred way back in 1948, but interestingly enough remains largely forgotten. I've never heard of this particular case, maybe some of you have out there, but there's a very interesting point associated with it as to why it's weird it remains forgotten, and I'm going to point that out here in just a moment. But after you read this story, you'll basically have an idea the next time you're flying on a commercial airplane, in this case whether it's for business or whether it's for travel. Think about this case next time, because who knows, you might actually be another participant as the people were within this particular case. But it has to do with this. You're looking at a representation of it now. It's known as the Chiles Whitted UFO sighting. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here, and then I'll present my own thoughts and opinions on it as well. So what was this Chiles Whitted UFO sighting? Well, it occurred back on July 24th, 1948, specifically in the dead of the night at around 2:45 a.m. What makes this case very fascinating and almost one of a kind, or at least one of the earliest one of the kinds, is this. It was one of the very first commercial airplane UFO encounters, meaning instead of, let's say, your usual military plane or some other type of helicopter from the military or something like that I've reported on so many times on past videos, this one has to do with a commercial airplane. I don't know the exact one, like in terms of it being like Delta or United or something like that, but just imagine one of the big airlines, one of their planes flying from point A to point B, filled with passengers, and it had a UFO encounter up there in the sky. That's what makes it very, very different from some of the other ones out there. It's one of the first ones associated with commercial airplanes. But yes, it happened there at 2:45 a.m., specifically over an area of Montgomery, Alabama. This was a DC-3 plane that was flying above that city at that time. It was cruising around 5,000 feet or so up in that area, and it was being piloted, of course, by two pilots. They were there. They were basically just flying the plane as is. The captain was by the name of Clarence S. Chiles, and the co-pilot was John B. Whitted, hence the name associated with the Chiles Whitted UFO sighting. They were there flying it, and then most of the passengers, most of them, not all, more on that here in a minute, were asleep because of it being a red-eye flight. 2:45 a.m., I imagine I would be sleeping at that time too. Well, things turned for a much different stance when all of a sudden, to the right side of the plane, that's when they saw, or at least one of the pilots saw this. Like, they saw this interpretation of this UFO coming straight at them. In fact, it looked like it was almost to the point that it was gonna hit them. That's how close it came to them. This is how they described it. It was very quick too. There wasn't much to describe, because this is what the thing that was coming straight towards them, barely missed them, went off to the starboard side. It was a difference of about maybe 1,000 feet, and then it quickly disappeared up in the sky afterwards. So I imagine it was just seconds associated with this encounter, but it was enough, at least, for the pilots to be able to turn to the left. Like, they saw that something was incoming. They thought it was originally something involving an unreported jet, but then when they realized that it was something completely different, they, of course, veered to the left, and then that's when this thing barely missed them altogether. Crazy stuff when you think about that, because imagine if it actually hit them. And then this would have been not just one of the first commercial airline planes encountering a UFO, but one actually involved with a crash, no less. But here's how they described how it looked like. It had no wings, and it had no tail. Or it may have had a tail, but it may have just been a smooth tail. In other words, nothing in terms of it having any kind of gears or other things that stood out towards the end of the tail. But what stood out the most was this. There was these two rows or windows that appeared to be glowing, as they described it, like burning magnesium. So there was a top level of windows, then there was a bottom level of windows. And then they did notice that it had a nose section, and on that nose there may or may not have been a pointed end. And this end had a bluish glow as well. In fact, it ran from the nose almost towards the end of the body itself. But again, it's hard to tell because of how quickly it flew by and how little in terms of interaction it had. But the only other thing that stood out was towards the end of this UFO, there seemed to be an exhaust, and on that exhaust there was a coloring associated with it. It was almost like orange reddish as well. And this emission or this exhaust was almost the length of the UFO body too. And so both pilots, when they saw this thing veer towards them and then they were able to get out of its way, they looked at it and then they both had an agreement as to the length and the visual look of this thing, whatever it was. In fact, they even compared it to being the size, at least approximately, of a B-29 bomber, but being somewhat thicker, at least with regards to that characteristic. But yes, they saw this, they veered off, and then that was it. That's as quickly as it came, it disappeared right off the bat. Now, if you're wondering whatever happened to the passengers, did they see anything? Again, most of them were actually asleep. Most of them were just going from one place to another, and they were using this time period in the middle of the night to sleep. But one of them was awake, and this unnamed witness stated that they more felt like there was some kind of disturbance. Like when this thing flew past them at such a great speed, the pilots originally said that they witnessed nothing in terms of a disturbance to their plane. Like there was no, as they called it, some kind of airwaves that was coming from the actual UFO. In other words, the plane just didn't get rocked. But the witness associated from the passenger stated the opposite. They stated that, quote unquote, the DC-3 was rocked by the wash from this object. On top of that, one of the other passengers was stating that they in turn saw a brief description of this thing, whatever it was, in terms of the UFO. This is their exact quote. They said, "I saw no shape or form. It was on the right side of the plane, and suddenly I saw this strange, eerie streak out of my window. It was very intense, not like lightning or anything I had ever seen before. But I imagine but that was it for as far as their perspective. But I imagine it was even briefer than what the pilots had on their end. The only other thing to notice as far as this case is this: there were actually some witnesses as well from a nearby air base. It was the Robbins Air Base and an area called Macon, Georgia. There were some people there that also saw this particular craft, not when it was trying to hit or if it was or wasn't trying to hit the actual plane, but they saw this same craft flying about a half hour before the DC-3 was within that area. And so this thing, whatever it was there about half an hour beforehand. Maybe it was staying nearby. Maybe it decided to come back. Who knows? But either way, though, it was traveling in a southerly direction at that time. The witness described it as traveling as a high rate of speed. And then, of course, this would be the one afterward that would be right there almost hitting this commercial airplane. Now, there was an investigation that happened, and from it, this was one of the results. And again, it shows to the almost ridiculousness associated with it. It was theorized that this was actually a meteor. And again, you're reading that right. It was a meteor. Again, absurd, right? When it comes to that. The Project Sign was the official investigation. They agreed on the meteor theory, even though they stated as well that the way this object maneuvered did not match that of a meteor. And instead, they ended up putting it more under the unexplained category. So that's the official response. It's a meteor, but it's not quite a meteor. It's instead unexplained. But no, it's not a UFO. Something along those lines. There was even another theory that it was more along the lines of a temperature inversion, and that's what another specific example of what it could be when it comes to this almost crash. But otherwise, that's it. That's all the information associated with this sighting, the Chiles Whitted UFO sighting. If anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. This particular case is almost coming up on 80 years too. Imagine that. You're flying in a plane, you're going to a place. In my case, it could be going to Washington, D.C., or it could be going to Las Vegas, or it could be going to another area in the country, and then all of a sudden you look outwards and then you see this coming right by you, almost hitting your plane. And what a crazy experience that would be too. All right, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.